The Chicago Bulls officially announced their new head coach on Wednesday, and I'll be honest, I really liked what I saw. Now, I'll be honest, when I sat down and watched Tiago Splitter's introductory press conference, I wasn't expecting some magical quote that was suddenly going to fix everything that I thought was wrong with the Chicago Bulls. I wasn't expecting some sort of declaration that the Bulls are back or having someone walk through that door and instantly erase years of frustration. What I was looking for was something much simpler. I wanted to know that this organization finally has a direction. And honestly, for the first time in a long time, I felt like once that press conference was over, I finally had an answer. And the answer might actually be yes. Because for me, the biggest takeaway from Wednesday wasn't Tiago Splitter. It wasn't Bryson Graham. It wasn't Michael Reinsdorf. It wasn't ownership. It was simply the biggest takeaway for me was that everybody seemed to be speaking the same language. And if you've been a Bulls fan for the last decade, you know how unusual that sounds. My name is Sonny Verma. Please, if you're interested in Bulls content, make sure you subscribe and like this particular video. As I promise you, I'm going to give my takes on what's going on with my favorite franchise. For years now, one of the biggest frustrations with this franchise has been trying to figure out what exactly they want to be. Seriously, if you're a Bulls fan, think about it. There have been so many moments over the last several years where the Bulls felt like they were trying to do multiple things at once. They wanted to develop young players, but they also wanted to compete immediately. They wanted to build for the future, but they also kept making moves that suggested that they were worried about the present. They wanted to establish a culture, and yet they never had a consistent identity attached to that culture. The Bulls have spent years living in the middle, not bad enough to bottom out and not good enough to matter, not young enough to be exciting, but not experienced enough to contend. Just kind of floating, just kind of being there. And eventually, fans stop getting frustrated with losses, and instead they start getting frustrated because they don't know what's happening. They don't know what the plan is. And that's why I think this press conference was different. Not because somebody promised championships, not because somebody made bold predictions, but because everybody involved seemed to understand exactly what the next chapter of Chicago Bulls basketball is supposed to look like. Let's start with Bryson Graham, because I think quietly he's already becoming one of the most important figures this franchise has had in years. When the Bulls announced Splitter's hire, Graham talked about Tiago Splitter's basketball intellect, his ability to connect with players, to develop players, to the competitive spirit. Now, think about those words for a second, and they should have caught your attention because we all know that where the Bulls are right now, actually, those words might actually make sense. This roster isn't one move away. This team isn't sitting on the door of contention. The Bulls don't need somebody to walk in and manage a finished product. They need someone who can create one. They need someone who can develop players, to teach players, to connect with players, to create habits. And that sounds exactly what Graham was looking for. And then Tiago Splitter started talking. And what did he talk about? High standards, habits, daily improvement, culture, development, accountability. And suddenly you're hearing the exact same themes, not similar themes, the exact same themes. And I think that matters because alignment in sports is one of those things that sounds boring until you don't have it. And then it becomes the most important thing in the world. Think about the best organizations in sports, right? The head coaches know exactly what the front office wants. The front office knows exactly what the coaching staff needs. The players understand their roles, and everybody is rowing in the same direction. That doesn't guarantee success, but it's usually a prerequisite for success. For years, I don't know if the Bulls felt that way. I don't know if anybody really understood where this organization was headed. And that's why Wednesday was so refreshing. Not because everything was fixed, but because the vision felt clear. Another thing that really stood out to me was how this process unfolded. From everything we heard, Bryson Graham didn't have some deep personal relationship with Tiago Splitter beforehand. This wasn't a predetermined outcome like we've seen in Bulls years past. This wasn't hiring a buddy. He actually got to know Tiago Splitter through the process, through interviews, through conversations, evaluations. And I think that's important because one of the biggest criticisms of this Chicago Bulls organization for years has been that the organization just felt too comfortable. They were too content with being familiar, too predictable, just too willing to stay inside their own bubble. We've all heard those criticisms. We've dashed out those criticisms. Some of them are fair, some of them probably aren't, but they've existed. So when you hear that Graham conducted a genuine search and landed on Splitter because he believed he was the best fit, I think that was a positive sign. It suggests to me that, again, this wasn't about relationships. It was about evaluation. And healthy organizations are supposed to operate that way. Now, let's specifically talk about Tiago Splitter, because I think the one question that Bulls fans are going to have is, why him? Why Splitter? Why not a bigger name? Why not somebody with a longer resume? And I think the answer to that is pretty simple. The Bulls weren't looking for the biggest name. They were looking simply for the best fit. And those two things aren't necessarily always the same thing. I think Bryson Graham looked at his roster and said, okay, now what do we actually need? Do we need somebody who can squeeze 43 wins out of a veteran-heavy group? Or do we need somebody who can build something sustainable? Because if the answer is the second one, the player development all of a sudden becomes incredibly important. Communication becomes incredibly important. Teaching becomes incredibly important. And those are the exact areas that Splitter, well, at least his reputation, seems to be the strongest. This honestly felt less like hiring a coach for what the Bulls are today, as opposed to hiring a coach for what they hope the Bulls eventually end up looking like. And honestly, that's a big distinction. Think about it. And this brings us to the Reinsdorfs, right? Because this is the part where the Bulls fans, for the most part, have rolled their eyes at. And trust me, I get it. I've been a Bulls fan for 40 plus years. The Reinsdorfs have taken criticism over the years. And a lot of it, most of it is deserved. Fans have questioned their commitment, questioned their willingness to change, question whether they're just too comfortable making money, even at the cost of mediocrity. Well, those criticisms aren't going to necessarily just disappear in one offseason, and they shouldn't. But I also think that we have to be fair. If we're going to criticize ownership when they make decisions that we don't like, we should acknowledge when they make decisions we do like. And this offseason, to me, has been different. They moved on from AK. They brought in a younger executive. Bryson Graham made it a point to thank Michael Reinsdorf for providing him the resources. And trust me, that stuck out to me, to conduct this job search or this hiring search properly. And what happened? They landed on a coach who has a developmental background. These aren't the moves of an organization that's desperately trying to cling to the past, right? In fact, these are the types of moves of an organization attempting something different. Now, will it work? I don't know. I have no idea. Nobody does, but it is different. And after years of hearing fans ask for a change, maybe it's just worth acknowledging when change actually happens. And again, I want to bring up the Reinsdorfs because, again, at first glance, thanking them just seems like standard executive talk. And every executive wants to thank ownership, right? Ownership gives them that job. That's normal. But I think there's something a little deeper here, because what Graham is really saying is they did trust me. They empowered me. They gave me the opportunity to conduct this search. They gave me the authority to make this decision. And if that's true, that's significant development, because for years, Bulls fans have wondered whether the basketball people were actually the ones in charge or whether it was ownership who really had zero basketball experience themselves. And at least to me, the words Bryson Graham chose to say today suggested to me that they're doing it the right way this time. And to me, that's encouraging. Again, I want to be clear. None of this means the Bulls are back. None of this means that Tiago Splitter is guaranteed to be a great coach or that Bryson Graham is guaranteed to be a great executive. Nobody's planning any championship parades or hanging of banners. The hard part starts now. Splitter has to coach. Graham has to build him a roster. The front office has to draft well. And then the coaching staff has to develop well. They're going to have to make some difficult decisions in the future. But the whole idea is to create a roster and build an identity. And that's where all of this will be judged, not at a press conference, not on a stage, or not in front of cameras. It's going to be on the court, where it ultimately always gets decided. For years, the Bulls have felt like an organization searching for itself, searching for an identity, a direction, a plan. And for one afternoon, it felt like everybody involved finally understood what the plan was. And I don't think that's blind optimism nor irrational excitement. I'm not saying in front of you right now that the Bulls are instant contenders. I'm simply acknowledging that for the first time in a long time, the people making decisions sound aligned. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from all this. The Bulls didn't introduce a head coach on Wednesday. They introduced a direction. And now they just have to prove that they can follow it. Because after years of just drifting, it seems like they finally now have a clear direction, and that enough feels like progress. And honestly, that just makes me cautiously optimistic on what the franchise needs and where this franchise is headed. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Believe podcast. Please, if you don't mind, leave a comment. Let me know you guys are watching. Let me know that you are a believer. Look, I know there's been a lot of dark times when it comes to this franchise, but I choose to remain optimistic. And if you choose to remain optimistic, please join me on this journey. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you share it with any Bulls fans in your life. And until next time, let's go Bulls.